All right, everyone, let's get the show started. Welcome to Office Hours. It's March 4th, 2020. My name is Eric Osterman, and I'll be leading the conversation. I'm the CEO and founder of Cloud Posse. We are a DevOps accelerator. We help startups own their infrastructure in record time by building it for you and then showing you the ropes. For those of you new to the call, the format is very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered. So feel free to unmute yourself at any time if you want to jump in and participate. If you're tuning in from our podcast or YouTube channel, you can register for these live and interactive sessions by going to cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/office hours. We host these calls every week. We'll automatically post a video recording of this session to the Office Hours channel, as well as follow up with an email so you can share it with your team. If you want to share something in private, just ask and we can temporarily suspend the recording. With that said, let's kick this off. So here are some talking points for today. They are mostly the same as last week. There's just a bunch of stuff we haven't had a chance to cover because we've had so many good questions. So if there's ever idle conversation, here's some talking points. So before we get to these, let's open the floor. Anybody have any questions, problems, interesting things they're working on that they'd like to share or ask?
I have a question.
All right, go for it, Dale.
All right, so more recently I've been actually doing like a make file to kind of help developers get through some of the repeated tasks for like building containers and pushing them out and so on. One thing I started to put a more focus on is the way in which we actually tag images. So I know like for some teams, they'll actually add the Git SHA as a part of the image tagging as well. Is there any particular standards that you guys find that works for you best?
For tagging the images?
Yeah, tagging the images, almost like a naming convention pretty much.
Yeah, so what we've been practicing mostly as part of our pipelines is that every push of the repo builds a Docker image and tags it with the Git SHA and the short SHA. Honestly, we never use the short hash. We almost always just use the long commit hash. And the way we use that is then for separate pipelines. So for example, if we have a separate pipeline that kicks off down the road and cuts a release like 3.2.3, what we'll do, that pipeline will look up the artifact for that commit SHA and tag it. If there is no artifact, then that pipeline fails. So basically, we decouple the building of images and artifacts from the process of retagging those images with the commit SHA. Now, I see a couple of different patterns happen here, and it depends a little bit of what your continuous delivery or deployment strategy looks like. In companies that don't practice strict SEMVer for their releases because they want more of like just a streamlined process of things hitting master, then automatically going to staging, prod, or other environments. Those companies tend to use SHAs for that instead of using SEMVer. There is still a way to use SEMVer with that, which is kind of nice, where if you make SEMVer part of your commit history, so you have like a release file, release.yaml, what we've seen are pipelines then that apply what's in the release.yaml on merge to master. So then it'll do that for you, which is kind of nice because then you have a totally Git-driven workflow for cutting releases. A little bit more rigid in the sense that you can't just use the release functionality on GitHub then if you want to be consistent. I don't know, did I hit any of your questions there?
Yeah, you did. So additionally, I'm not seeing a full adaptation of replacing like the maintainer tag in a Docker file with say using labels, which gives you a bit more versatility in sort of what can be tagged in there. Because I've started to use labels to also add the Git SHA within it, whatever version as well, along with the actual build.
Yeah.
Do you see that happening, or?
I think that is an excellent idea if you are able to surface that information as part of your CI system and your Docker registry, and assuming that it helps perhaps your QA team or others reconstitute what happened. So this is a big part of CodeFresh, is CodeFresh uses these labels on images extensively. So tagging the images or labeling the images if CI passed, labeling the images if, what do you call it? If your security scanning, CVE vulnerability scanning passes, labeling it with perhaps build time. So it almost makes your registry like the source of truth for all that extra metadata about that image, and that follows that image around wherever it goes. Have we been practicing it? It's not been something we've invested in, but I don't think it's a bad idea if it's become a prerogative for you.
Yeah, so I've just actually started to look closely at it, actually adding like build times to it, vendor IDs.
Oh, really? Yeah, so exactly,
Yeah,
you're on it.
you know, yeah,
So
so I'm actually doing it by passing like a build argument.
Yeah.
So I'll grab that environment variable during the CI and just pass it as part
That's the
of
right way to do it. And where this gets interesting is then if you, I mean, obviously this stuff is only as secure as your registry and only as secure as your ability to add those labels or preclude systems or processes for labeling it. But assuming that that process is secure, this is a great way to also then enforce policies on what gets deployed inside of certain clusters based on those labels. I'm not sure. So I'm pretty sure using something like, was it Twistlock will let you do that. And I'm not sure if there's a way of doing it with OPA right now, but maybe there's somebody else. If somebody else knows the answer to that, let me know. Awesome. Any follow-up questions to that or other questions? Cool. Are you doing vulnerability scanning right now, Dale, on those images?
Yes. Well, this is right, my own personal side projects that I'm doing.
Okay.
But we do use Twistlock as a part of our existing vulnerability testing.
Yeah.
So we're doing it both at build time within the registry for other images, as well as at the runtime, which is something that I like, just like having everything encapsulated and running that against other CVEs as well. As well, it also has integration like with Vault to inject into runtime different environment variables as well, which is a pretty good tie-in. But we're actually looking to possibly replace Twistlock with something like Claire and Falco. So we're exploring that right now, but we're haven't fully committed to it.
As part of that, have you explored the ECR's container registry scanning and how it compares feature-wise and how effective it is by comparison?
Yeah, so AWS is actually using Claire.
Oh, they are using Claire under the hood.
They are using Claire. I don't know the level of control that we do get or visibility into everything, but I'm thinking if we do it, we really should set up our own so we get the reporting aspect of it. But again, that just might be based on just my ignorance in terms of what they're offering. But from what I saw from service level, it didn't seem to be much.
And did you see that Quay has also been open source now?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's cool.
How that compares. So one thing I'd like to see in any system like that would be the ability to track kind of the mean time to resolution for a CVE in the system. So you don't want to shut down the service because the CD is suddenly detected there and cause the blackout, but you do want to track how quickly that, how long that persisted and until and when was resolved. Is that something that you guys are factoring in as well?
Yeah, so we have had that issue where our mitigation time varies because we may not have a resource who's dedicated to just doing that. So we've been actually cycling through teams and then we're trying to knock them out as possible. So yeah, so without a proper plan, you put a lot of vulnerabilities out there not to break the build, but with a proper process and resources behind it, then you can pretty much start feeling.
So there's a lot of background noise where you're at, Dale. Any chance? I know you're always in an open floor plan environment.
Yeah, I'm actually in a co-working space. That's why.
Oh, today, okay.
Yeah,
And
I'm
the
actually in
phone
Jamaica
booths
today, so
are all taken by the lifetime squatters there.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I know that. Fighting for the phone booths. Hate that. All right, well, let's see. Maybe it quiets down there in a little bit. There's a question from Casey Kent. He's been part of the community for a while now. He asks a question on chat. Could you touch on the setup and best practices with EFK stack on Kubernetes if you have some time? Sure, certainly I can point you in the right direction on that, Casey. So this is a very common question that comes up in the community. Unfortunately, our office hours notes are not properly tagged on like what we talked about or what to do. Just be aware that past office hours have talked about this on how to set it up. So the EFK stack for everyone, that's the Elasticsearch, FluentD, and Kibana stack. It's become pretty much the most common open source alternative for something like Splunk or Sumo Logic. So what we would recommend in this case is, first of all, configuring FluentD not to log directly to your Kibana, to your Elasticsearch instances, because it's so easy to overload Elasticsearch. And when Elasticsearch is unhappy, it's really unhappy. And it takes a long time to recover. Also, scaling your Elasticsearch cluster so you can send a fire hose to them is very expensive. So what you're going to want to do is set up your FluentD to log directly to like a Kinesis stream if you're on AWS, which I think you are. So if you send all your logs from FluentD directly into Kinesis, Kinesis is going to absorb those as fast as it can. And then you have the great, excellent option to drain that to S3. So you're going to want to send those logs from Kinesis into S3 for long-term storage, and you can have all the lifecycle rules and policies there. We have some great modules on Cloud Posse for like a log storage bucket that helps you manage those lifecycle rules very easily, so you can consider that. And then the other thing you're going to want to do is drain it for real-time search into Elasticsearch. So both these modes are supported by the Terraform provider, by the Terraform resource for this. Off the top of my head, I forget exactly what it's called, but it will write directly into S3 and Elasticsearch for you. So then the last thing is for certain things, you'll be able to then use Athena if you want to query the data in S3, so long as I think your query is complete in, 30 minutes? And then for like developers and stuff like that, they have the real-time access to the logs inside of Elasticsearch. Now, I want to point out one other thing that we've had a lot of success with that I like is that there's a little utility. It's called Sentry, I think. There's two options for this. There's two open source projects. And what it'll do is it'll take all your events happening from the Kubernetes event log and ship those into Sentry. Sentry is the exception tracking tool. And now what's cool is you see the most common exceptions bubbling up to the top, the most common events and things happening. And you can assign those to teams to look into using all the conventions that you have in Sentry. So Sentry is also open source, or if you're using the hosted version, that works as well. So Casey, was that a good overview of the architecture for setting that up? Cool. So he says that was what he was looking for. And we're also, two other notes, I mean, we're typically using the managed Elasticsearch by AWS, and that also comes with Kibana out of the box. So if you know the path, there's a subpath to it. I forget what it is. It's something ugly. But if you know that, then you can just access Kibana directly there. You know, a lot of people speak very highly of Elastico and their hosting of Elasticsearch being more robust, newer versions, newer releases of Elasticsearch. So that's a consideration as well. And it can be controlled with Terraform like everything else. The challenge there is if your organization has kind of a blank check to use AWS services, now suddenly you got to go get another vendor approved, and maybe that's why you wouldn't use it. All right. Any other? Oh, Andrew, I haven't seen you around. Good. Nice to see you join today. Where have you
Hey,
been?
I've been busy.
Aren't we all? So, how's your any interesting news to share with your projects there? Side projects, perhaps? Dad's garage.
No, not really. Not
All right.
so much on that. Other than I got my team on board, so we're gonna work on it. I
Oh, excellent.
I was not I was not able to get them on board with open sourcing our work, but maybe someday.
Yeah,
But
that's a tougher
we're
sell.
gonna build it out. Yeah,
I think,
my company in general is not. I wish we did more.
yeah, I think it's very difficult to go from closed source to open source, and it makes the in-house counsel very uneasy about that. But if you can get them to agree that certain new projects will be open source from the start, maybe components like modules and stuff, then it
Yeah,
might be a more clear cut and dry path to open source.
it sounds like we're there. Like I have our chief intellectual property counsel on board. I have our vice president on board, and it just has gotten pushed over to the back burner.
Yeah.
And
Has
it's really a shame because I'm so passionate about it that, every few weeks I send out an email on this thread that has
yeah,
been going back 4 months now,
yeah.
and like, hey, what's the status on this? Oh,
I
nothing.
know. Well, so when I was at CBS Interactive, I was leading up the cloud architecture over there, and that was one of my big drives was getting an open source policy, an open source initiative at CBS. And yeah, I think it took the better part of a year before we were able to open source one project out of that. Anybody else have any experience helping your organization open source code that you have?
It's difficult. It can be like pulling teeth.
Yeah. Were you able to do any of that at your last place, John?
No, there was talk of doing it, but just getting that ball rolling. There's a couple little utility things here and there, but to get them to understand the value add of open sourcing is quite difficult.
Yeah.
This is Blaze.
Hey, Blaze.
Hi. So it turns out so I've been working at Sumo for the last year, and they're pulling back on their open source initiatives.
Really?
Yes. In
Wow.
fact, I am officially looking for another job. And
wow. Yeah. Anybody looking for a community evangelist? Blaze is your guy here.
That's Sumo Logic?
Yeah. Yeah. That's where I was. Yeah. They have, I mean, I sort of get it. They didn't say as much, but they want to do an IPO. So they're basically just not making any investments that don't have a direct, immediate payback.
Yeah.
I think it's long-term, it's probably a strategic mistake because they want to have a bigger presence in the cloud native environment, and the competition is just eating them up.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I hope though that, and obviously this is being recorded and we shouldn't talk about anything we shouldn't talk about. So let's just keep that in mind. But their open source agent, I mean, I think it's great that the Sumo Logic collector is open source. Hopefully they continue to invest in that. I know that a number of companies are frustrated sometimes with missing log events, and that the agent can be consuming considerable resources just to consume all those logs and stuff like that. So I think the more people looking at it, the better.
No, actually, they're going to be. I think there's no question that they're less interested in investing in the collection because they don't really see it as their, the installed agent.
So maybe relying more therefore on third-party agents like Fluentd.
Yeah, Fluentd.
That makes more sense then.
Yeah, Fluentd and Prometheus are huge parts. Although interestingly, they have a relatively limited participation in those projects. Yeah, so in terms of in terms of things being recorded, so far everything's fine. They've been very transparent as far as I can tell about that. But I think that what would work well for me is someone who really wants to get as much adoption of their product as possible. So if you guys know anybody who's like super aggressive about developer outreach and making sure that their stuff is easy to use and it works well, yeah, I'm kind of in a little bit of a bind, quite honestly, because I think, 4 years at Yale, 4 years at Google, 3 years at Sun, it changes somebody, you're just not the same. And I find that if people aren't willing to get into continuous improvement, and if they're not committed to excellence, I end up getting into trouble by making suggestions and rubbing people the wrong way.
Well, I think one thing to look out for, though, is if you do want to work more with open source, is look for a company that started that way rather than tried it out to see if they could get more customers.
That's such a good point. Thank you.
Because in the form, if they start out that way, it's built into their DNA. You can't really undo that. But the latter, it's kind of like, I don't know, insincere almost.
Wow, that sounds obvious.
Yeah. So I think there's a number of, one company comes to mind. I don't know. You can check out KubeCost, the KubeCost channel, see if they're looking for anybody. They have open core thing there, doing some interesting things. Just because
I've been hearing a lot about Fairwinds as well. So.
Yeah, Fairwinds as well. Yeah.
They make a great product.
Thank you.
Basecamp is coming out with their new Hey product for email. So, and I don't think you get more open source than the creator of Rails. So.
Oh my God, I would give my left nut to work for Basecamp.
Well, they've been hiring for a while, so you might want to check out.
They should put that on the billboard.
All right. So any other questions related to Cloud Posse repos or DevOps in general, or best practices, or surveys? If you want to get a pulse of what other people are doing, this is a great chance. We got about 17 people on the call right now.
So I've been spending the last 3 weeks standing up some Amazon MQ instances, particularly around network brokering. And I tried to use the Cloud Posse modules, but I couldn't really control the config file in any way. And I'm having to write a lot of custom tooling around setting variables and making it result in XML that doesn't blow up.
Let me talk about that MQ module just for a second. So all of our modules are born out of actual engagements, customer engagements, and then we open source that. We have this kind of open source first model where we start the modules open source. This use of ActiveMQ was for a enterprise SaaS product that we were running on-prem, and it didn't work with the. It turned out not to work well with the Amazon's MQ service, so we had to cut bait on it. So therefore, the continued investment, we haven't had a reason to continue investment on that. But I will say, Maxime on my team, we 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, we had 130 open pull requests against our Terraform modules, and I think we've gotten this down to like 13 now or something. So if you do want to spruce it up, or you see any ways we can improve it, let us know. Also let me see, my guess is that module is still HCL1, not HCL2. And some of the template file manipulation was really basic, right, in HCL1. So if we wanted to do any more advanced parameterization of that file, it would have not been feasible in HCL1. With HCL2, now I think it's totally feasible, so we could have a better, more powerful config that you could pass there. Or just provide an escape hatch and let you provide the raw XML if that's helpful. I'm not directly familiar with that module right now, so I might be misstating some things, but did that clear anything up, or are there additional feedback you have on that?
No, that was pretty much it. At this point, I've had to pretty much write everything from the ground up, and if I can figure out any ways to piece any of that out of there and send it back your way, I'd love to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Feel free, and this goes for anyone here, if you have anything you want to contribute back. You're not sure about the next steps to start on that, you can always reach out to me on the SuiteOps Slack. If you haven't joined the Slack team, by the way, that's a good chance to promote that for a second. So if you go to slack.suiteops.com, you can join our Slack team. And then my name's Eric on there. You can find me, Eric Osterman. Cool. Casey Kent asks in the chat, common patterns for machine learning infrastructure for continuously training, ingesting data, and ETL. There's just a ton of stuff out there, but it'd be nice to hear what you suggest. So I cannot speak to this personally as a subject matter expert. I can describe a pretty common architecture or pattern that one of our customers is using at a very high level, but I'm not sure if that's even valuable. You probably already know to that degree what I would say. There's the whole suite of obviously Amazon's products for training the models for machine learning. We've not touched or looked at it. Maybe there are people here on the Slack team that have done more with this. Anybody have some context to add?
I zoned out for the beginning of that question, but have you checked out Kubeflow yet?
Cloud Posse has not yet worked with Kubeflow.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different like UI or API centric different tools. I did a sort of Kubeflow workshop at a meetup at some point that was the extent of my knowledge, and thought it was pretty useful for that beginning part. And then one of the things is you can plug in different platforms for how you want to host it once you get the model built. Specifically models that get retrained a lot, so like marketing models that have seasonality that you want to run refit over and over again. Something like an investment in Kubeflow seemed to make sense. But if it's a model you train a few times, then there's like dozens of different ways to do it. None of which I've been super excited about, but definitely if you're not sure where to start with, either Kubeflow itself or you're typing like Kubeflow versus, and then you'll see all the other ways to do it. Seems like a good place to start.
Yeah, that's a good tip.
I had one thing to mention about conference in town.
Yeah.
Scale, I think, is this week.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That's a good tip. So if you're in Los Angeles or close enough, Scale is happening towards the end of this week. I think it starts on maybe Thursday.
Yeah.
And runs through Sunday. And then there's DevOps Days on Friday. So I'm going to be at DevOps Days this Friday at the Pasadena Convention Center pretty much all day. So if you're there, please hit me up on Slack and we'll find a time to meet up for coffee or hang out. Are you going to go, Todd?
I'm not feeling well enough to go. So
bummer. Yeah.
Keep my cooties at home.
I'll be there Friday and Saturday.
Who was that?
Sorry, it was Todd. I'll be there Friday and Saturday.
Awesome, Todd. Thanks for letting me know. Do hit me up on Slack if you are around. I mean, you bring up a serious note there, though, that a lot of conferences are being canceled. Like, they're dropping like flies right now, the conferences. I know Google canceled theirs, and who else was it?
KubeCon Amsterdam just got canceled this morning.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Or delayed, 3 months.
Yeah, exactly. Some of them are postponing them or postponing indefinitely. So it's too bad. I'm going to take my chances. We'll see.
I think there's a live stream, isn't there?
Probably, but bless their hearts, the Scale team works for basically for no pay and a very minimal budget for a conference of that size. So some of the equipment for that recording is pretty dated. But yeah.
Hey Eric, it's Adam Watson. Hey, not to add anything, but Pasadena declared a state of emergency an hour ago, so that might
really?
Yeah, just heads up.
All right. Well, hopefully that doesn't mean like they automatically, have jurisdiction to cancel all conferences and stuff. So, yeah, that's worth checking out to see if that's going to affect scale at all.
Yeah, just heads up. That was an hour ago. I figured I'd float that.
Yeah, thanks, Adam, for bringing that up.
Nobody shoot the messenger, please.
On the topic of events, I think nobody in this group is in Boston, but if you know any people in Boston, I'm and related to, I'm not going to stream it, but I'm going to try to record the talks as well. So if I can record them for a friend, Observe 2020 is like a CNCF open telemetry related event that a friend of mine's trying to put on. So it's April 7th. So my hope is that we can get through the like curve of Corona, and then it'll be back down by then, but we'll see. Worst case, we'll try to figure out rescheduling, but I put the link in the office hours chat as well.
Yeah, what's that 24 hours of DevOps conference? I forget what it's called. That might be our future. What was that?
I was thinking that was like in December or something.
Yeah. It was last
November.
last year.
All day DevOps.
Yeah,
ADDO.
that was the one. Yeah.
There's a couple of those not related to DevOps that have done the 24-hour thing. Not my type of conference organizing foray. I like sleeping occasionally.
Yeah, and I do like meeting people face. Actually, I mean, honestly, the reason why I go to conferences is to meet the people and hear their stories, less the actual talks themselves. All right. Any other specific questions? Otherwise, maybe I'll jump into the practical tricks for change management and get your feedback there for what you've done. All right. Let's see here. So this came up. I forget who it was that asked for some asked the community at large kind of what you're doing for change management and change control. I wanted to kind of inventory those tips and tricks to provide guidance, because I think just saying, just using GitHub isn't enough. Just having, IAM policies isn't enough. Just having CloudTrail audit logs isn't enough. So what are the things that you have in place for change control? And here's kind of a list of some of the things that came to mind as the common best practices today. So, okay, so the obvious thing is to bring up, obviously, having a version control system. This is your GitHub, this is your GitLab or Bitbucket. This is what allows you, if you're practicing infrastructure as code, then to point to the code that should have resulted in a change along the process here. The next one being infrastructure as code, defining the business logic of your infrastructure and using reusable modules for that. So there's one thing just to write infrastructure code like raw Terraform resources, but then I do want to capture that a module, like a Terraform module or Helm chart, is a discrete unit of business logic, which you can kind of sign off organizationally on, that this is how you do things, and then reduce the scope of change control when you're using reusable components there, especially ones that you've signed off on in the organization. Automation, obviously, taking what you have now in source control and having a way of getting humans out of the equation, because humans are difficult to audit, but source control is easy to audit, and anything that is machine control automation, you can continuously refine and improve and have controls in place. Pull request workflow. So basically how you enforce that every change is reviewed and approvals on that. And related to that, having approval steps within your pipeline. So you might have all the checks and balances in your GitHub with branch protections and code owners and requiring certain checks to pass and a certain number of reviewers. But in the end, you might want to have still additional controls that are arbitrary, and having the ability to have approval steps in your pipelines is an excellent way to have control over when things change and visibility of when they change. Notifications, I'm sure a lot of people here are already sending a lot of this stuff to Slack. One thing that we've really liked, I was surprised how much I liked it, was the ability to add a GitHub comment on pretty much any commit SHA, and then you have that history there. So if you have a pull request, you can also comment on that on commits and see when that pull request, when those commits in that pull request were deployed and to what environment. So that provides a nice living record of changes. So as I was talking about earlier, is kind of using branch protections. This is very, very, very much key to enforcing when stuff change. So this is something GitHub supports very much. I'm less familiar with GitLab and Bitbucket. Any users here using GitLab and Bitbucket? How much of the branch protection functionality do they have compared to GitHub?
Are we assuming open source or paid?
Both. And if you can make the delineation, that'd be great. Between
yes. So my experience with GitLab is that it does actually have that enforcement, and I think you can actually set it up have it done by default, and then start to.
Oh, you can set it organizationally. That's nice. Yeah. That really sucks that you can't do that with GitHub. Yeah.
I believe GitLab. So I have the most experience with on-prem GitLab open source.
Okay.
And I believe freegitlab.com is actually different. It gives you more. The on-prem GitLab open source gives you you can't merge if the pipeline hasn't passed, but it does not give you pull request approvals.
No,
so you got to pay for it.
Oh, wow.
You got to pay for it for the pull request approvals. It's the very bottom tier. It's only like $4 per user per month.
Yeah.
But you got to pay for it for the pull request approvals. I'm not sure about the GitLab.com.
So,
but
okay, that's good. That's good. Does GitLab have the concept of code owners?
I think that's a Git thing, isn't it? Isn't that just a Git thing?
No. Well, I mean, I think it's an open standard, but it's got to be enforced at the pull request approval. So code owners relate to approvals.
Yeah. Okay, I got you.
So GitLab.com does allow per branch merge protection. It controls who can merge. You have maintainers, developers and maintainers, or no one in terms of roles. And then you also can control who can push to it.
Okay.
With the same roles.
Yeah. That's correct. Absolutely.
Yeah. So code owners is this where you can basically have a file, and that file will map a team to a path on the file system of that repository. So you can say that anything in your Terraform IAM project, for example, has to be signed off by SecOps. Would be an example.
GitLab does support code owners in the bottom tier of paid, not free.
Okay, cool.
So in the starter or bronze tier, which is the $4 a month.
Yeah.
Per user.
So the next step is kind of everything we've discussed so far is a little bit at the mercy of your VCS solution. Then we get the ability to enforce policies, and policy enforcement has been a really hot topic, getting a lot of attention, especially towards the end of 2019, and I think it's going to even get bigger now in 2020. With tools like Open Policy Agent Conf Test, which builds on OPA, and TFSec, the tools at your disposal to enforce broader level policies that make it easier to administer change control at an organizational level are reaching greater maturity. Still early days, but it's at a point it's usable now, and some great videos and demos out there of it. In fact, we have one on TFSec and a basic example that John whipped up. We'll link to. John, did you want to talk about TFSec today, or should I just share that video? It's up to you.
I can show
another time too.
And TFLint, I can show.
Okay.
The question came, I forgot who asked it, but
yeah,
I can kind of show a quick example.
Who, any users interested in seeing a demo right now of TFSec? TFSec is a purpose-built static analysis tool for Terraform to enforce policies on your code there, and using that together with GitHub Action. All right, we got a thumbs up from Adam.
Yeah, for sure.
And Blaze. Okay.
Before we do that, I would actually add a line to use version pinning that using Semver when it comes to some things like Helm charts is not even enough. You have to use SHAs.
That is a valid point. Let me just add that to. Can you write what you said in the Office Hours channel so I don't forget it, and I'll update this with that, with some of the caveats there, because there are some caveats. Like Semver is only as good as the maintainer's ability to practice it, and the problem with like Helm is that many maintainers don't actively bump their Semvers, so they're constantly squashing their versions.
And that's the problem. Like I could push up 1.1.1 and you could use it, and then I could push up another 1.1.1 with changes, and you could.
And another good point here is that Semver is not cryptographically secure versus using SHA's are. So it's it has been shown you can, if you are really bent on messing people up, you can probably find some version of a commit history to cause a duplicate SHA or something, but generally it's secure. Or as John recommends, you can tag if you're using some tagging scheme of plus the SHA that might.
Yeah, so that's valid Semver to add something to the end there. So the hard thing with Semver, especially if you're looking at a repository, is knowing like which one of those is the specific version that I want, and putting the version number in there kind of makes that a little bit easier. You still have to dig into the specific SHA, but it can help by tagging on the SHA at the end. That's
good. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for chiming in.
And it's more of a security nitpick than it is a change management nitpick.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely. You can still push to the SHA.
But I think it's hard to have one without considering the other.
Oh, sure.
Change controls. So and this list here is not exhaustive. So I whipped this up in about 20 minutes. So if anybody has points out what things, basically I want to add to this with things that you're doing and recommendations you have. So please, if you maybe add to the thread here, there's the link I posted with the change management in the Office Hours channel. If you add any suggestions there as a thread, I will try and incorporate those into this. All right. So John, are you set up?
I am.
Awesome. I'm gonna hand over the reins, and we're gonna get a little nice demo here of GitHub Actions. This is unscripted and unplanned, so we will thank the demo gods for a successful.
Yeah, exactly.
Where's sharing here?
So I kind of wanted to go through. I guess I should hit share here, right?
Yep.
Kind of wanted to go through in terms of what TFSec and TFLint are, and then kind of showing the actions here as opposed to waiting for the actions to run and things, but kind of speaking through that. So one of the questions that came up in the chat after the video was posted was about using TFLint as opposed to TFSec. And so TFSec essentially is static processing, static analysis for your Terraform. So it has a set of rules. It's not super exhaustive. but it does have a pretty good set of rules of things that you want to watch out for, especially along the lines of like security groups, security rules that are open to the internet. So I have some basic Terraform here that's meant to fail. So I have a CIDR block that's wide open, nothing really specific there. HTTP, missing some configuration here, and this Azure managed disk is actually set to false. So in running tfsec here, let me expand this a little bit. It basically looks at my code and determines, hey, this CIDR block actually should not be wide open. This actually, you should use HTTPS, not HTTP. This one here is actually missing a VPC configuration, and this one needs to be secured or encrypted, excuse me. But there are those times where you actually need something, like if it's a web server, right? You need to actually utilize this open CIDR block here. So it has the syntax to where you can actually tell it to ignore one of these, one or more. And you can see it actually is missing that one now. Same thing with utilizing HTTPS, things like that. But what you see here is that there wasn't a catch on my specific TF-lint code over here that is utilizing a T12. So the T12 extra large is, you know, a size that does not exist, right? So if I run TF-lint here, it doesn't catch any of these security issues, but it did catch that my specific instance type is invalid. So I think there's not a direct one-to-one comparison to say, hey, you should use TF-lint instead of TF-sec. I think they both are useful for different purposes, even though there may be at times a little bit of overlap. But as you can see here, I'm using AWS Vault. I just have it, you know, shortcut to AV because I don't like typing a lot. But if I put in, you know, like a wrong AMI, it actually is talking to AWS. So I had to set my region and all that. So it's actually talking to AWS and looking to see, is this a valid AMI? So there is a little bit of a cost here in the sense of like speed. So if you hook it up to like a pre-commit hook or something like that, it may take a second, depending on how big your Terraform project actually is. But it's definitely a pretty good.
And how well does it work if you're using like almost exclusively modules and stuff like that? Is it? It's actually operating at the resource level?
It does, but they actually do have module support. And I started working to kind of get this up, and I'll add another video that goes through this fully. But it actually can check a module to see if the actual types exist and actually go into the module to make sure that the resources in the modules actually are valid. That can have a little pro and con, depending on the open source modules you may be using, because there may be some issues there. But the good thing is that they do have this ignore flag that you can use there, as well as a full HCL config file that you can use, and you can tell it to ignore certain modules in here, provide var files, variables, specific credentials, and also tell it to disable certain rules. But the rules are actually, I think it's 700 or something rules. Yeah, 700 plus rules.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
Yeah,
yeah, that's cool.
Are you able to add additional rules?
Yeah, they actually have a way to configure it. I actually didn't go through that part, but there's a way to extend it beyond just the basic configuration.
Do you have a GitHub Action run that you've teed up? We're almost out of time, I think, so I'm not sure if we have time to go through the full run. But
I
if
do.
you have something.
So I have this one for the TFSec, which was basically the same thing that we just looked at there. So let me actually go to the other one. So the TFSec here This is one of the passing runs. It's very simple. It's not a lot that is happening. It's basically just running tfsec, but the configuration or the usage is basically just this. There are configuration changes that you can add in here, variables, those sort of things. But this will pretty much run the full tfsec on the current directory and let you know whether or not it's passing or failing. You can do it on the PR as well, of course. But it's very useful to actually get a heads up that something actually happened at this time. Oh, I know why I can't see it, because I'm not signed in this in this browser. But it does give the full output.
So also related to this, your training tfsec repo, that's open, that's public, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of those are public. Yeah, so this is.
So we'll share that in office hours channel.
This is the full output here. So yeah, it's very useful, very quick to set up, very easy to use, and it definitely will help catch some of those issues that you just may miss.
Where I see this being exceptionally valuable is if you're practicing a traditional Git workflow where you deploy on merge to master, meaning that you've lost the recourse to make any corrections by the time you've already merged. And you want to mitigate the failures after merge to master. So I think this is a really nice way to avoid that if you're not applying before merge to master, which is like the Atlantis workflow.
Exactly, and especially with like tflint here, if I just fat finger that and it's not like some malicious, issue, whenever I run it, I find out, oh, I actually have an issue here before I go through and apply, it's useful to find that stuff out as early as possible in the terms of like the software development cycle.
Yep.
Something else that I've looked at in this space, I haven't had a chance to use it yet, but it looks very interesting, is you can use OPA to evaluate Terraform as well.
And ConfTest. So ConfTest builds on OPA in a more opinionated way as well. So that's kind of cool.
The example they give is actually kind of a useful one.
Yeah.
The example they give is, you have decided that you don't want your Terraform scripts to be too big, and you create an OPA policy that says you're not allowed to create more than X number of resources with one Terraform apply, and OPA runs in your pipeline or whatever before you apply, and can actually stop you from the term they like to use is blast radius. Your blast radius has to be smaller than a certain limit.
Yep.
Which actually is.
How's that work on the first apply where you may be generating?
It creates it looks at the plan. It doesn't look at the apply. It will create a Terraform plan and then look at the plan.
Mm-hmm.
It's one
and
of
evaluate the
principle,
plan.
I like it. I wonder how well it works in practice, but yeah, in principle, I like it. The reason why is like if you're using a lot of modules, and it's very easy that
the plan doesn't care.
Well,
right, when you do Terraform plan, even if you're just doing modules, it's going to tell you exactly what's actually being created.
But usually I'll have 25 resources at least getting created. If I'm using a module, for example, anything that does something more serious is going to be creating a lot of resources. So the cold start problem, like once it's been provisioned, I can imagine that we don't want to see too many new resources created all the time. But spinning it up from scratch, I wonder. I agree with small pull requests, but even a small pull request can have a big plan.
Yeah.
So, all right, we're almost at the end of the hour. We got 5 minutes left. Any questions related maybe to the OPA stuff or the TFSec or TFlint stuff that John just showed us?
What would you say the learning curve is on OPA?
I can't speak from firsthand account.
It's in line with the rest of the industry, like Kubernetes, and
yeah,
it's high,
well,
along
but
with
it's very
everything
readable.
else in the.
I think it's very readable, but like
What, the
anything else
Rego?
for you to, I think the hardest part about it is developing opinions that can be codified into policies. Know what, like we know we want to do it. What should we actually be doing? Like that's the hard part. The language is super readable, very easy. I think you'll pick it up in less than a half hour or something. But
okay, yeah, that was the same blocker actually. We're looking for like predefined policy that would actually make sense, like a use case.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was where I got stuck.
Yeah.
Start small. Though, I mean, we're starting, we haven't really used it much, but the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use it to create a mutating admission controller that all it's going to do is check that every pod in the cluster has a label with a charge code so that we can track back for billing for everything. And that's all it does. Like, that's all it's going to do.
Yeah, a small win.
Yeah.
That's cool. And that kind of a policy agent or the use of the policy agent is a little different, right? Because you wouldn't be doing that at CI, would you? Or you're doing this?
No, that would go into a mutating admission controller inside the cluster.
Oh, okay.
But you can use that. You can use OPA that way.
Mm-hmm.
OPA can be used. I mean, OPA's great. OPA, you can use Rego with OPA all over the place.
Yeah. It's I think it's giving some enterprise vendors a run for the money. We're trying to do policy stuff.
Well, I could tell you for sure, HashiCorp Sentinel is very much so kind of locked in that same vein with OPA. And I didn't use it much, but I'd probably much rather use OPA, just scanning it real quick.
Yeah.
There's the home page, openpolicyagent.org, has a tiny little example for an admission controller. It's 8 lines. It's great. Yeah, it's 8 lines that checks that. It's 8 lines, and in those 8 lines, it checks that all pods come from trusted registries.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, it's great.
That's a great policy there. I could see to have, and similarly to that would be like, even if you need to use public images, that you're pushing them either to private ones or you have a pull through that you're
containers.
Specifically Kubernetes platform or all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, and it's just a common engine for it. I like that. Common language.
Pretty dope.
And because it's open source, we can all build on it as a community, just like Terraform and the Helm registries and stuff like that. All right, everyone. Looks like we've reached the end of the hour, and that about wraps things up for this week. Remember to register for our weekly office hours if you haven't already. Go to cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, thanks for sharing everything, John, for the live demo there of the TFSec and TFLint stuff. That was really interesting. A recording of this call will be posted in the Office Hours channel and syndicated to our podcast at podcast.cloudposse.com. See you next week, same place, same time.